What is up, Pit Boss Nation, and welcome to my kitchen. Today, we're heading to the Lonestar State, and one cut reigns supreme in Texas. We're cooking up a whole packer brisket. That's coming up right now on Platinum Grilling. Alright guys, well welcome back to Platinum Grilling. I am your host, Chef Shaun O'Neale. Like I said, today we are tackling the packer brisket, and there is a lot of information to go over here. But I want to make sure you get a feel for the brisket. We're not going to cover every single thing, so I'm gonna cook this the way that I like to do it on the Pit Boss Platinum Series Lockhart, available exclusively at Walmart, and it's the way that I've been doing it for a while. So the brisket really supports a lot of that animal's weight, so it's tough. That means low and slow, that means smoked, low braised. But there's a lot of things that you need to know about a brisket, especially if you're gonna smoke a brisket. So a brisket is comprised of two muscles. This big lumpy side is what we call the point. There's a lot of more technical names for it, but in barbecue terms, this is the point. And then down here is the flat. And I'll show you how the muscle is connected. There's a lot of fat, so there's a lot of trimming. Brisket is one of those barbecue cuts that a lot of the work is in the preparation. You know, like a pork butt, you season it up, you throw it on the grill. Ribs, you remove the membrane, you throw it on the smoker. With brisket, it takes a little bit of time in trimming and really prepping it, seasoning it. I'm going to inject it to keep some moisture in it. So it takes a little bit of time. A lot of your time with the brisket is going to be on the prep side of things. Okay, first off, you're gonna notice on pretty much every brisket, unless you get a super high-end Wagyu or something to that extent, that there's a little bit of discoloration here, okay? That is absolutely nothing to be worried about. It's a process that they use in the sealing. It's not discoloration, it's not old, it is discoloration, but it's not age. So when you see people trim that off, they're more trimming it off to try to get that perfect line on a brisket. You don't necessarily have to. We're going to trim off some of it down there. Okay, second, when you're buying a brisket, make sure that it's got even fat. I did have one spot that I didn't notice in the store that's missing some fat. So let's flip this guy over, and I can show you, this is the flat, and this is where the flat and the point meet. So you've got all this fat. This is what's called the decal, and we gotta get that out of here. There's a lot of different ways to trim a brisket, and people big on the competition circuit will trim it where there's very, very little fat left. I'm not gonna get in there deep and take all the fat out in between. I want to save some of that fat. It's a little bit of a buffer zone for you to make sure that your brisket stays nice and juicy. Only one thing left to do, and that's get hands-on and start trimming up our brisket. Let's do this thing. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is talking about knives. I use a couple different knives. One is a long fillet knife. The other is going to be a boning knife. I like the way I can get into little nooks and crannies with this, and this guy really helps me bend around and you really shape the cuts that I'm making. So with a honing steel, you're just gonna basically take the same actions like you're actually cutting something, you know? An exaggerated cut, if you will. And take your time, you know, you can do this slowly to start, and then once you get a little practice, you'll be able to move a little bit faster. We're gonna get started on this guy by having it fat side down. I call the fat side the top side, even though we're gonna cook the top side down some on the smoker, but I do call the fat side the top side. So I'm gonna start by trimming up this outer edge, and I really just wanna give it a nice line. We'll take our fillet knife here and just run ever so slightly right down the edge. So we only cut off a little bit of meat here, and mostly fat, but we got rid of that discoloration and we gave it a nice straight line down the side there, which will really look good. One other thing I did want to mention as we flip this guy over. When you're trimming it, take note of which way your grain's running, okay? So as you can see here, my grain is running kind of at an arch, starting here, going there, and so on, right? So take note of that, because you want to remember that so you know where you're going to slice when this thing is done. So I'm going to remember that my more pointy end is where I'm going to start slicing, right here. And then you're going to kind of fan when you slice it and make it nice. So you'll cut off this edge, and as you're moving, you'll kind of fan this way, right? So just keep a mental note of which way your grain's running, and then we'll talk about the point actually after it's cooked. But you really want to take a mental note of the flat, which way your grains are running on that before you start cooking. So now that we've got this trimmed off, we can start to look at especially this decal. I mean, that's hard. You have to get that out. That will not render down. It will just be fatty, gelatinous-y, kind of hard still mass in the middle of your meat, and you don't want that. So we're gonna be pretty cautious here, make smaller cuts at the start, and try to run our blade right there along that fat. And come in this way. See, there is a lot of it in there. And we're just trying to get rid of that big hard chunk on the top. This is where some of the competition guys will dig in and really go crazy getting in there and getting all of that fat. It comes down to about right here. They'll try to get all that fat out. I'm just gonna dig out a little bit more with my boning knife here. That looks pretty good to me. So what we've essentially done is we've just kind of smoothed it out a little bit, and then when we take out some over here, we'll be able to place this down and it will lay a little flatter. But we've left that fat that runs through so it will drip into the meat, right? So we've left the majority of that fat there. And then from here, we'll take off any of these like little hard bits that kind of line along the brisket. Anything that's kind of hanging off that will burn, like that will burn. We'll get in here and get some of this stuff off. All right, you know, that looks pretty good to me. I'm not too concerned about getting in there and digging it out. We're gonna get off some of this as well. Just flip it around so you guys can see what's going on. I'm actually gonna flip this over to get to this guy. And what we're gonna do, all right, so we're gonna take a little bit of this fat out. We're leaving some in there to protect the flat, obviously, but we wanna get some of that clunky stuff. I mean, that's gonna have a hard time rendering down. But when you put it in a pan and try to turn it into beef tallow, it actually works really well for you. So if you're gonna melt down the fat into beef tallow, just throw it in a stock pot over low heat and let it simmer or melt, essentially. And then just store it at room temperature, and you can fry whatever you want in this stuff. Makes great French fries. All right, so you see there's still a little bit more right here that's kind of clunky. So I'm just gonna cut some of that out too. All right, so I started with about 11.5 pound brisket, and I'm probably gonna take off 1.5 pounds of fat. So when you're cooking a brisket, you're gonna think about it as about an hour to an hour and a half per pound, roughly in that area. But you can never go by a time when it comes to meats. You wanna go by temperature and feel. So let's take off some of these little nubs again, give it a nice shape. We definitely wanna trim off any nubs up here as well. Give it a nice shape up here. On top, you wanna leave at least 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch of fat so that can really render down and melt its way throughout the brisket. All right, so there's a bunch of fat right here. This is gonna be our primary trimming spot right here. When it comes to the top of the brisket. And then again, any of these little stranglers that are kind of hanging on and might burn. Okay, so this next step is definitely not traditional Central Texas brisket. You guys from Texas, take it easy on me in the comments, all right? But like I said, we're doing this the way that I find it easiest for a home cook to do it. So that means we're gonna use an injection. We're just using beef broth, and I sprinkled in a little bit of the Pit Boss Lonestar brisket seasoning just to add a little bit of flavor interior-wise on the brisket. All right, so we are using 2 cups of beef stock with a little bit of the Lonestar brisket rub, and we're going to inject this. So make sure that your injection is nicely mixed up. Some of the seasoning may have sunk to the bottom, so every time before you fill your syringe, give it a little whisk. And then we'll go ahead and get our syringe filled up here. This is not the best syringe in the world, so we're gonna have to do this a few times. So basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna put about 2 cups of injection into the flat and about 1 cup into the point. And picture basically like 6 to 8 holes going down one side and 6 to 8 holes going down the other side of the flat. And you gotta get in here a little bit. You gotta get underneath the point just a tad to really get to every inch of the flat. All right, so you're just gonna keep moving your way up and down this side of the brisket and then down the other side of the brisket. This thing's got a crack in it, it keeps spraying me, so I keep having to dodge beef juice. It's coming at my face. As you can see, just getting the needle in, it's a tough piece of meat, so that's why brisket really requires such a long, slow temperature cooking time. So I'm just finishing up getting the point injected here. There we go, all good. So now there's obviously a little bit of residual beef stock liquid sitting at the bottom, so I don't want the brisket sitting in a bunch of liquid, right? So we're gonna transfer this. I'm gonna put some paper towels down. We're gonna transfer this to a different sheet pan. Very carefully, try not to squeeze it too much because there is a lot of juice in there. We're gonna let this sit. We're gonna throw it in the fridge for about 30 minutes to let all those juices kind of circulate, and then we're gonna season it up. So just pulled the brisket out of the fridge after we injected it. It's been sitting for about 30 minutes. It's time to season it up, and we're gonna go through stages here because we want the injection to sit and kind of intermingle with the muscle. Then we want the first layer of seasoning to sit on the bottom side of the brisket for about 30 minutes, and then we'll do the top side. So like I said earlier, we're using the Lonestar brisket rub from Pit Boss, and this is just a salt, pepper, and paprika. So we are gonna add a little bit more than paper thickness of seasoning to the brisket. Like I said, we're doing about a little bit thicker than a paper thin coating, evenly all the way across. If you see a clump, just spread it out a little bit with your hand so you don't get any seasoning clumps down in there. All right, so we'll keep on getting the edges here. If you need to lift the brisket up, we're only doing the bottom of the brisket and the edges right now, and then we're gonna let it sit in the fridge for another 30 minutes, let that seasoning kind of set. So when we flip it over to season the other side, we're not losing all of our seasoning. And it's really important to get all those edges, because again, you want that bark to be solid and consistent all the way around the brisket. Okay, flip this, we can do these edges, do the end here. Again, watch for the cracks and make sure you don't have anything clumping up in there. That looks pretty good. We're gonna return this to the fridge for 30 minutes. All right, our prep work for this brisket is just about done. I am going to transfer this onto the other sheet pan. All right, and we will take a look at the other side tomorrow as well and check the seasoning, make sure we don't have any little gaps there. So let's put this in the sink. So we'll go ahead and season up the other side here, and this is our fat side, I call it the top side. And again, we're going a little teeny tiny bit thicker than a piece of paper. And again, remember I talked about the gaps, so I've already seen some little bit of a buildup there. You want to season the walls in there of that V that we've got shape going on right there. You can pull it back a little bit, make sure it gets seasoned, but then kind of run your finger in through there to make sure there's nothing settling in the bottom of that little crevice. All right, so I know some of you guys are thinking, why do I have this squeeze bottle here? Generally, sometimes the fat side of this can be a little bit drier because the injection soaks the meat a little bit, but this fat was actually kind of had that tackiness to it, so I didn't end up using this. This is just apple juice and apple cider vinegar. It will be my spray tomorrow when we go to cook this, just to keep the brisket moist. So we use it every 4 hours, not too much. I like it because it's a fairly neutral flavor. It's just vinegar, apple cider vinegar, and apple juice. You don't really pick up on the flavor, but it helps keep that moist environment and helps keep the brisket moist as it's cooking. So, all right, so this is looking pretty good. Looks like we have good, even coverage all the way around. All of our edges are nice. There. All of our edges look good. And we'll take another look at it again tomorrow, make sure we have that nice coating. But that looks pretty good. So we're gonna let this go back into the fridge for 30 minutes. Once it all sets and we have that deep burgundy red color, we're gonna wrap it as tight as we can. But for now, let's get it in the fridge for another 30 minutes. Final step for today, guys. So far today we trimmed it, we injected it, then we let it sit so all that moisture could kind of distribute throughout the meat. Then we season the underside, which is the meat side. We let it sit for 30 minutes so it can form that pellicle. Now it is time to wrap this bad boy up. We're just gonna come a little bit past the edge of our table here. Try not to disturb your seasoning too much if you can avoid it. You want to wrap this as tightly as possible to avoid any condensation getting into the brisket overnight. We're gonna let this sit in the fridge overnight, so you really want to, you don't want to disturb anything, but you really want to make sure you have surface contact. And yes, you might lose a little bit of seasoning, but not too much. Once it sits, when we let it sit for that 30 minutes, it really kind of bonds itself to the meat. All right, now's when we're gonna start getting a little tighter. All right, so now's when we're gonna start getting a little tighter, so we'll pull out some more of this wrap, and then just try to get this really as snugly as you can around the brisket, and then we'll come back and we'll wrap it the other way as well, just to make sure we don't have any little air gaps. I mean, you might get a couple little tears, especially if you're using a big wrap like this, as you're pulling the wrap out, so don't worry about that. We're just gonna throw this guy on a sheet tray, and I've just been bouncing back and forth between the two sheet trays. We're gonna put it in the fridge. I'll see you bright and early. All right guys, so it is right at 8 o'clock in the morning. We're about to go ahead and get our brisket going. I do see some of the rub has kind of removed itself in the plastic wrap, so we'll go ahead and give it a little bit more seasoning in the spaces that it needs it. I got up about an hour ago and took the brisket out of the fridge, let it come to room temperature. It's still a little chilly, it's still got a little chill to it, but it's much better off starting at a warmer temperature than a colder temperature. So we're gonna hit it with a little bit of our seasoning just in any splotchy parts. We've got our grill set to 250 degrees. Some people say 275, some say 225. For a pellet grill, I find splitting it down the middle works beautifully. So 250, we're gonna set this thing right in the middle of the grill, and we're gonna start it fat side down. The pellet grill, I feel like the heat is kind of near the grill grate, right? So you really want to get that fat moving, get it rolling, get it rendering down some. So we're gonna start this fat side down, and then in about 4 hours, we'll flip it over, and then we'll cook it for another 4 hours until we get to the crutching point. All right, let's flip this guy over. Put it on this side with some more seasoning, try to make it fairly even. And like I said, you're gonna use pretty much a whole bottle of this brisket seasoning on one brisket. Kind of move it around a little bit, there we go. All right, now we're gonna move this guy to the grill. Like I said, we're gonna start it fat side down, right in the middle of the grill. First thing we wanna put on is our water tray. Brisket needs some humidity, it needs some moisture in the air. So we're gonna put a water tray on the side of the grill just to keep that moisture in the environment as we're cooking. So we're gonna lay this guy right here. Put our water tray right there. Leave it off because your thermometer's over here, so leave it off the side a little bit so you can still get a appropriate temperature reading. All right, now we're gonna put our brisket on. That looks pretty good. I'm looking to see how much air can circulate around it. Like, I don't want it touching the water tray. I don't want it too close to the back. I don't want it too close to the front because I really want air to be able to circulate around the brisket. So brisket's on the grill. We're gonna close it up. We're gonna leave it at 250 degrees. We're gonna smoke it for 4 hours. We're gonna leave it at 250 the whole way through this cooking process, but we're gonna smoke it for 4 hours now. So we'll go ahead and close this guy up. All right, so we've got our brisket on the grill. It's gonna smoke for 4 hours. Right now I wanna put a probe in it. So we're gonna smoke it for 4 hours. Right now it's fat side down. Once we get that 4 hours, we'll flip it. All right, so we'll go ahead and put our probe in. The Pit Boss Platinum Series Lockhart comes with 4 of these probes. So you can do a lot of different stuff. I mean, you can have stuff top smoking cabinet on the grill and keep a perfect, precise temperature of everything. All right, so once we've got this probe in, you can download the Smoke IT app, and that Smoke IT app will actually show you what your temperatures are. You can control the temperature of the grill. You can turn the lights on and off, so it's really convenient, especially for a long-term smoke. So keep an eye on that Smoke IT app, because it really tells you everything that's going on with your grill, and you don't have to move off the couch if you don't want to. We're gonna go dead smack here in the center, right there in the middle. So that's good. We're gonna shut it down for 4 hours. Absolutely no peeking. Let it go, let it roll. Just keep an eye on your temperature. All right guys, so I was keeping an eye on my Pit Boss Smoke IT app, and I noticed that my internal temperature had gotten to around 145. I waited just a little bit to let it get to 150. 150 is usually the area where you start to notice a little bit of a stalling happen. It's called the stall. It will usually happen between the 150 and 170 region, and it's just the meat really coming up to temperature and cooking and becoming nice and tender. So it's only been about 3.5 hours, 3 hours and 15 minutes, something like that. We're gonna go ahead and flip it now. We're gonna see that the bottom has become nice and barky, and that's because on a pellet grill, your heat source is right there. So we're gonna go ahead and flip it right now. We're gonna leave the probe in. The probe's gonna turn towards the back. So you're gonna need to be a little careful here. But it looks absolutely delicious. All right, so we can see that nice bark starting to form. This is really where the majority of the heat is, and at the front and at the back, right? So you're gonna see the bark starting to form there a little bit earlier than you will elsewhere on the brisket, just because that's where it's right over the heat. So don't be worried about that. The rest of it will catch up to it. So we're gonna let that go. We flipped it over. I'm gonna give it a little spray. I actually was talking and I should have sprayed this before I flipped it, but that is all right. That's not a big deal. We'll get the other side before we wrap it. Since we're fat side up now, that juice is gonna start dripping in. So that's not gonna be a big factor, but you just wanna moisten it just a little bit. That's looking pretty good. So we'll go ahead and close this up. So we're gonna wait until we get through the stall to wrap it up or do the Texas crutch. So as soon as we see it get to around 180, that's when we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up to preserve all those juices, keep it nice and tender, fatty and delicious. So that's gonna take about another 3.5 to 4 hours. But again, keep an eye on your Smoke IT app. Every single piece of meat is different, so you never know what you're gonna encounter as far as times go. So keep an eye on that app. All right guys, so this brisket is actually moving fairly fast. It's been about 6 hours and we're already at 185 degrees. 185 degrees is where I like to pull the brisket off to crutch it. And then crutching it just means wrapping it in butcher's paper. You can do it in tin foil, but it kind of ruins your bark. Butcher's paper gives you a little bit of room to breathe and really kind of keeps that beautiful bark that you've worked so hard on creating. One thing I wanted to mention, I know a lot of you guys are thinking, why am I not smoking it in the upper smoking chamber? You can, 100% comes out delicious, beautiful, succulent, juicy. The reason I'm not is because it burns a ton of pellets. You gotta remember there's about 100-degree difference between the grill and the upper smoking cabinet. So you're gonna burn through a lot more pellets if you gotta keep this set at 350 to keep the upper smoking cabinet at 250. I smoke my briskets, anything long, anything that's over like a 5-hour smoke, I'm always gonna do down here on the grill section, literally just to conserve the amount of pellets that I use. All right, enough of that. Let's get this brisket off. We'll pull the temperature probe out. This guy looks beautiful, beautiful. All right, so we're gonna put this back in after we wrap it up. Got a nice little jiggle on it already. Nice bark forming. All right, that looks great. Looks amazing. So we're gonna give it another little spritz just to bring some moisture into the wrapping as we wrap it up. Get the other side here. Get that nice little burnt end. That's gonna be delicious. Okay, so we've got 2 pieces of butcher paper, about 3 feet long, somewhere in that range. We're starting with the fat side up. And we're gonna fold in our corners. Keep folding in your corners as we go. Make sure you kind of pull it back, get it nice and tight. So now you have a nice little brisket bundle, and this guy's gonna go right back on the grill, right back on the smoker. We're gonna keep it in the same direction, so the point over the heat and the flat away from the heat. And then we're gonna finish this off. It should take 2 to 3 more hours. Like I said, this guy's moving pretty quick. I do wanna throw the probe back in it, so once I get it on, I will throw the probe right back into the meaty part, probably around here. Yeah, somewhere around right there. So let's do that right now. All right, and grab our probe. And we're just gonna try to insert this into the fattest part that we can feel. Right about that. That looks good, that feels right. It feels like it's in some meat. The first time I went in, I think I went straight into fat. But it's moving really good. We're gonna close this back up. We'll keep an eye on our Smoke IT app to see what our internal temperature of our brisket's at. We're getting close. It smells insane. Brisket always does. I'm sure all my neighbors are jealous. We're gonna be right back. Keep it wrapped. Keep the temperature probe in there. you're gonna see when it's done. You're gonna see when that temperature hits a beautiful 200 degrees, which is perfect for when the collagen starts breaking down, all that fat melts through the brisket. We've only got a couple hours left. All right guys, so good news, we are at 202 degrees, which is a beautiful, perfect temperature for this brisket. We're gonna pull it out and get to the hardest part, which is the resting, of course. Oh, it's got a beautiful jiggle to it. Looks completely juicy. So now, as in everything that you cook, the waiting, the resting, the hardest part, and this one is a long one. So this one you wanna let rest for at least 1 hour. I let it rest for 2 hours. I want to really make sure all those juices settle, really everything distributes back through the meat, especially into the flat, because that's where it needs the most help. So hands off it, don't unwrap it. For 1 hour, I suggest 2. So now is the moment of truth. Time to unwrap this brisket. We're gonna go ahead and glove up here because it's gonna get a little greasy. It looks good, juices are flowing, it feels incredibly soft. This guy unwrapped, ooh yeah, it feels really good. You wanna carefully unwrap it, make sure you don't make a mess everywhere, because like I said, this thing is super duper juicy. Ooh, that's what we wanna see. We wanna see that jiggle and that wiggle there. So this is our point side, this is our flat side. And it became a little bit hard to tell after the cooking process. Ooh, yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead and get a glove change, and then we're gonna start trimming this guy up. I've been saying the whole time, every single brisket is different, so we're gonna look at this and see how we want to attack it. I'm seeing that my point comes all the way down here on top of my flat, so this is gonna be my fatty part right here. So that's where I'm gonna cut it in half, but for now, we're gonna go against the grain. Remember I talked about that sharp edge was gonna be my reminder. So we'll take off the end piece here. Got a decent smoke ring, nice and tender. It's tender, it's a little dry. I kind of expected that from the flat. It was a little bit on the thinner side, but flavor is delicious, and I know this point is just gonna be so juicy. So we'll just kind of cut a few slices here. All right, so as you notice, I forgot which way was my my reminder point, and I cut into it the wrong way. You see how that grain looks super dry, looks like it's gonna be hard to get through. And because that was me and I went through the wrong way. Mistakes happen, but I caught it pretty quickly. So we'll come in this way. That's much better. You can do the pull test on a brisket. That was a thick slice. Here, let's get a good one here, and we'll do the brisket pull test. Crumble apart, and it shouldn't stay tough. It should just ever so slightly pull apart, just like that. So we'll cut a few slices here, just a little touch on the dry side. That's one of the problems when you have those two angles of meats, two angles of muscle. So we're gonna go ahead and switch up and go into our point here. I know this one's gonna be juicy. I can feel it crumbling, and that bark and those burn ends are just amazing. So you could separate these two completely. You just get in there and just take apart the flat from the point. As a matter of fact, I've already kind of shown you one approach to this. Let's go ahead and do that as well. So we're just gonna run our knife right in there. Boom. Separating the flat and the point. We left a little teeny bit of the point up here, and you can just see how juicy and unctuous that is. And we're gonna get in, ooh, yeah, look at that. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. All right, so we'll put the flat back like that, the way it goes. Our point, we're basically gonna turn this away from us, and we're gonna cut straight down the middle. As a matter of fact, we're gonna cut straight down the middle. There you go. That's just beautiful and juicy and delicious. It's just my favorite part is the point. Your flat is always gonna be just a little bit on the dry side, no matter how good you are. But your point, if you can nail it, it is one of the best cuts in barbecue. Now these take a little bit more of a sawing action, and as you can see, it's already falling apart. But it still holds that structure, right? And then we give it that pull. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about right there. That's brisket, baby. So a little bit dry on our flat, not the side that was underneath the point. I can show you that. That is just insanely tender and delicious, just like the point. I absolutely love the point of a brisket. It is one of those special, rare, and unique cuts and flavors and textures that you can get in barbecue. And this is about as good as it gets, guys. So as usual, you can find this recipe and many, many more on pitbossgrills.com. Follow me, I'm at Chef Shaun O'Neale on social media. I can't wait to see you next time. This has been Platinum Grilling. I'm Chef Shaun O'Neale.